Progressive Talk radio station, WCPT in Chicago, and AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. And we have got a lot to talk about today. We are honored to have with us the Principal Chief of the Cherokee Nation, Chuck Hoskin. And as I look at the weather here in Chicago, which will be 72 degrees and sunny, and Minneapolis, St. Paul, 85 degrees. I just wanted to get right into this, everybody, because we're honored to have the Principal Chief of the Cherokee Nation. He is, I guess, in our broader language, he's the president of the Cherokee Nation. And so we effectively have a head of state with us today. And we're so honored to have him. And I have to tell you, my heart breaks because when I heard this story, sadly, it was believable. It's a horrible history, everybody. It's a horrible history where children had been forcibly removed from their parents, and we're going to have the chief talk to us about that. But they had a horrifying discovery: a mass grave of 215 children was found at a relocation school in Canada. And I want to know what a relocation school is. How did this happen? And what is the history of relocation schools? Let us start first with greeting Principal Chief Chuck Hoskin of the Cherokee Nation. Thank you so much. Blessings to you for being with us today.
Well, thank you, Santita. It's good to be with you this morning.
What happened? Prime Minister Trudeau has offered an emotional apology. The Canadian government is calling on the Pope to not only to apologize, but to do something. What happened? 215 babies?
215, yeah, children, babies. What happened was the product of a Indian policy in Canada that's familiar to the United States. Those who have studied the history, which is to remove Indian children from their homes in an effort to, quote, civilize them. There was a supposed reformer in the United States in the late 19th century who phrased it as kill the Indian, save the man. In other words, remove indigenous people from their tribal communities, deny them their culture, and in some cases, and this was the case in Canada and the United States, literally beat the culture out of the children and their language out of them so they wouldn't engage in those practices. And that is what happened on this continent in the 19th century and into the 20th century. And it happened in Canada. It happened in the United States. This is a gruesome discovery, but it's part of a larger story about governments who believe through official policy that the problem with Indians were that they were Indians. And the problem with Native peoples is that they were Native peoples, and that to save them was to rip them from their families and their homes, and then to go about treating them in a brutal manner, which in this case resulted in deaths of over 200 children who were buried away in a mass grave. It's hard to imagine that happening anytime in the last 100, 200 years, but it happened. And I think the Canadian government, though, is doing the right thing in terms of facing it and wanting to engage in reconciliation. So it's a good step, at least.
So we're talking with Chief Chuck Hoskin, the Principal Chief of the Cherokee Nation, about this gruesome, painful discovery at one of the relocation schools, which we've had in the United States, but this discovery was in Canada. 215 children in a mass grave. Take me back, Chief Hoskin. How were these children removed from their homes? Was it the law? I mean, did someone come and get them? What happened?
Well, it was the law. First of all, there was immense pressure put on indigenous communities, both legal pressure and economic pressure. I mean, I can tell you from the Cherokee Nation standpoint, we had less poverty when we were allowed to govern ourselves than when there was the pressure brought to bear from the United States and white settlers and federal Indian policy. I'm not an expert on Canadian First Nation history, other than to say I know enough to know that the pressures were similar. And so children, in some cases, who were deemed by local reformers as to be living in unfit homes, but they were living in homes that were in keeping with tradition of mixed families, extended families living in the same dwellings. But the outside reformers said, no, this is not good for the children. We've got to take them away. So in some cases, they were legally taken away by the imposition of the law of the more dominant society. Forcibly taken away, lured away in some cases in terms of the economic pressures and the pressures of poverty on indigenous families. In other words, your children can go get this education and be cared for. So it was a mix of those things that happened in Canada and in the United States that led to a large part of a generation of indigenous people, indigenous children, being taken from their homes. And this was a purposeful policy. I mean, the idea was they had tried to extinguish Native peoples by dispossession, taking them from their land, removal, other legal schemes to suppress Native governments so that the dominant culture could take over and take resources. When that did not sufficiently work, I have to say a very sinister but very clever plan to deny the next generation essentially an indigenous life. And it was very effective in the United States and effective in Canada, effective in the sense that it almost succeeded. It definitely is the reason that indigenous languages are endangered, cultures are endangered. But in this case, lives were lost, and I suspect that that's something we'll continue to discover across this continent.
Amen. Because in this particular case, they found the remains of a child as young as 3 years of age. Um,
Yeah.
what happened at these schools? I mean, when you call yourself, not you, but when one calls oneself
Mm-hmm.
civilizing, or is that Europeanizing?
It is. It's the colonizing mindset that by some righteous power, by something handed down from on high, that this culture was the right culture, the dominant culture, and so kids would be brought in and receiving an education, but their hair would be cut because that was how people ought to look. Santita, we actually see that still happening today. This idea, I know we're talking about the loss of lives, but the denial of culture still happens today across cultures in terms of a dominant culture saying you have to cut your hair. But that happened at these schools. And the injury inflicted just through that act of cutting the hair of a young boy or young girl, more often a young boy because boys are supposed to have short hair, was sort of the initiation into this school, into these types of boarding schools. The denial of cultural practices that these young people had just grown up understanding was their life way, was another form of injury. And again, language being spoken, you can imagine this is a mix of indigenous people, so different languages are spoken, but imagine a little boy finding a little girl from a similar tribe or a common tribe and speaking their language, and just the joy they may have felt, and to physically have that beaten out of them. That happened at these boarding schools. And so it wasn't designed to be primarily this torture chamber, but it was informed by this European idea that their culture was the right culture, and that indigenous languages were bad and cultural practices bad, and to get the children to get in line, the disciplinary practices of the day were employed. And when children would die, in the case of this school in Canada, they were buried in a mass grave. But again, I suspect that we'll continue to discover those sorts of graves, and because across the continent there are children that just went unaccounted for, and that's, I think, what this discovery is about, is accounting for them.
Well, I mean, indeed, there is a New York Times report that said thousands of indigenous children vanished in Canada. How does a human being vanish? Oh, you know, matter can't be destroyed. I mean, how do you do that? No.
Well, that's true, and here is something else that I think we should think about, is that this is, people will call this a dark chapter in history, and that is a true statement. It's also a crime scene, and that's something that you could go across this continent and find different boarding schools and find evidence of the child that was, removed from their parents, removed from their tribal lands, and were unaccounted for in terms of their whereabouts. That's a crime scene. Our topic today is not the Tulsa Race Massacre, but I was thinking of that a couple of weeks ago in Tulsa, that we're remembering history as we should, but we were in the midst of of a crime scene, and then that's what has happened in Canada. They've discovered a crime scene, and there ought to be some accountability for that.
And people need to know that you were very active in the Tulsa commemorations. That's where I saw you, and
Yeah.
given this, because this is not a new story to you, how did Tulsa resonate with you as a result of your own history?
It's very powerful in two respects. One, sort of in a personal sense, and the other as a tribal leader. The Tulsa Race Massacre happened on historic tribal lands. The Greenwood community in Tulsa is a community that was, its origins are rooted in both Cherokee Nation history and Creek history. Why? Because those were Creek and Cherokee tribal lands. So when President Biden came to Greenwood, he literally is coming to the Cherokee Nation. So we have this history with the community that developed there and flourished there until it was beaten down and literally burnt to the ground. On a personal level, though, this is a chapter of history that myself, like so many Oklahomans and so many Americans, is something that we grew up not familiar with. And to the extent that it was exposed, it's referred to for most of my lifetime as a riot, which invokes ideas of people, gathering in the street and protesting and then being put down for the sake of public safety. That's sort of the imagery that the dominant society likes to put into our minds through miseducation and misrepresentation of history. And so on a personal level, as I've grown up, it was very jarring for me to think about this happening, but also jarring to think about it not being taught and not being told. And I think there's a parallel with what happened with indigenous people, that these boarding schools, as you grow up, the larger society doesn't want to talk about it. It's an inconvenient truth. It's something that's a difficult conversation they'd rather not have. But I think we live in a time, Santita, in which we're forcing these conversations and we're forcing this reconciliation, and that is a good thing. But we've got a lot of work to do. I mean, in Canada, I think it was within the last decade, the Catholic Church was still not willing to take steps to apologize and atone for its role in the boarding school. I'm not saying that it was completely driven by the Catholic Church, but that's a major world institution that continued to essentially deny that part of its history. But I think that denial can only last for so long, for so many generations, and I'm glad we're living in a time when that's changing. And it was changing for me in Greenwood to see the commemoration, and it's changing for me when I read the New York Times article on this gruesome discovery, and I see the reaction from communities all over the world. That at least is encouraging.
We're talking with Principal Chief Chuck Hoskin of the Cherokee Nation about this gruesome discovery. It's so painful. 215 children in a mass grave one as young as 3 years of age at the relocation schools where indigenous people were forced to send their children so that they could become civilized, Europeanized. What do you think about that, everybody? 773 WCPT, 773-763-9278. I see on my timeline. Hey, Vanderlei down there in Brazil. See a lot of tears, a lot of people. It's like another trail of tears, if you will. I mean, it's not a pun. It's just a very real thing, Chief Hoskin. I mean, the New York Times called this a cultural, well, not someone in the article called this a cultural genocide. A cultural genocide. I mean, where the body survives, but the culture is taken out.
Yeah, that is well put, because 215 lives lost is and should be the most important thing, because these are human lives lost. These are children lost. As I say, it's a crime scene. But the bigger, broader injury, let's just say the broader injury, because there's nothing bigger than the loss of human life. The broader injury is the annihilation of culture, or the attempted annihilation of culture. That was the goal of the policy of removing children from their tribal lands. The goal was to rid the planet, essentially, of those lifeways, of those languages that were deemed so foreign to the sensibilities and the cultural norms of the larger society that they had to be extinguished. Because, again, the exploitation of indigenous lands, the dispossession of natives from their lands and resources was done in a variety of ways. You mentioned the Trail of Tears. That's one of the most prominent examples that happened to my people. But that wasn't enough to destroy our lifeways and to rip our culture away, because our culture was starting to get in the way of the pressure of migration, of white settlers. We practiced the communal holding of lands. We we had a legal regime that wasn't quite in line with the American notions of how laws and governments should be structured. And that's true across this continent. And so to crush it, it wasn't enough to remove people. It wasn't enough to put our people on reservations. The next step was to deny an entire generation their culture and their language, in the hopes that eventually there'd be no tribes, that there'd be people left and they would integrate into society, and that everyone could go about their business. But that's the broader injury here, Santita. And it worked to some degree. We've had a great deal of loss of culture and language among Native peoples on this continent. So it was somewhat successful. Fortunately, First Nations in Canada are strong, getting stronger every day, and tribes in this country in the United States are strong and getting stronger every day.
And that is good news. I mean, because it's very interesting. I think you're right. It did work because a lot of indigenous people we know, or people who present themselves as indigenous, actually are white people. They look like white people. And that's interesting. Black people were not able to do that. And those of us who did called ourselves passing, and we kind of passed on out the race, if you could. But wow, I mean, well, that's it's this is a really, really tough way to go. I mean, and people of color have had a really, really hard way to go in the Americas. This has been a tough experience for us from the north to the south. What Where do we go from here? I mean, President Trudeau has offered an apology, and it appeared to be heartfelt, because I'm sure he was horrified. Um, what do you think the Catholic Church ought to do? What are the next steps for the Canadian government? I mean, because we have the issue here in the United States too.
Yeah, we do, and that's what we have to wrestle with as governments and as institutions and as churches, is how do we truly make amends if we ever can. But of course, we believe in redemption. We believe that there can be reconciliation. I think, to me, it's important that governments and institutions acknowledge that crimes were committed, not just that this is a dark chapter and we're sorry. That's a good first step, and the Prime Minister of Canada issuing that heartfelt apology is a necessary step that in the United States, for various dark chapters, took far too long to happen for a lot of minorities in this country. But it is a good first step. But we also have to understand that this came at a price to Native peoples. That cost was borne in terms of a loss of language and culture. Those things are difficult to hang on to and to rebuild, and frankly, they take resources to rebuild. I mean, in Cherokee Nation, we're spending millions and millions of dollars to save our precious language, because if we don't do it now, it'll be gone forever. That's true of indigenous peoples all over this country in terms of the danger of the language. Many of them lack the resources, and I think governments in the Catholic Church and others responsible have to acknowledge that there has been identifiable injury done here to individuals, to families, to the extent that we can ever trace these bodies to families. There was injury, and there's injury to tribal peoples in terms of language and culture that will cost them resources to hang on to and rebuild. You hate to reduce things to a dollar amount because it diminishes the immeasurable suffering that happened. But at some point, governments that apologize and institutions that apologize have to understand that there's real identifiable injury here, that these are crimes, and there has to be some accountability. That takes a variety of forms. So it's got to be more than an apology, Cynthia.
You know, it's got to be more. It's got to be more. I've got about 30 seconds. Is there anything else that you'd like to say?
Well, I think that as the world does from time to time, when they read a story about a dark and tragic chapter with an indigenous community, hearts go out genuinely to Native peoples, and they start to study a bit more. In this case, what happened with boarding schools on this continent. That is a positive thing. What I would encourage people to do is what you have done and what Reverend Jackson has done is that you've explored what's going on today. And First Nations in Canada are doing amazing things. In fact, if you Google the name of the tribe that was connected with this boarding school, one of the first things you see is a housing project they're working on. There are great things that tribes are doing today that are in spite of the great odds that were against them, and that's reason to celebrate with them. So cry with them, be sorrowful with them, but also celebrate with them and celebrate with us. And we always love to have you back in the Cherokee Nation, Santita.
Well, you know, I can't wait to get back. I had a beautiful time. It was a tough time, but you know, it sure was great seeing you and Kim Teehee. Now we just have to get her seated in Congress. Do not beat
That's
that.
right.
You know, come on. I beat that tambourine every time I see you. Kim Teehee,
We appreciate it.
Congress, sending you much love.
That's right.
And Principal Chief of the Cherokee Nation, Chuck Hoskin, we are honored to have you today. Coming up, John Nichols, everybody. Back in just a minute. Chief Hoskin? Okay.
One thing. Okay, I guess Chief Hoskins dropped, but Anita from NC, should I tell her to call back? She said she could call back later, or
no, because I'm going to be going off at the top. But I wanted her to hold because I want to get her. I'm going to get her comment at the top.
Okay. And I'll call John Nichols right now.
Thank you so much. Whew. Everybody, that was a lot, wasn't it? But this is a story that we need to know. Well, you know, Daryl, you said some white people are still not wanting to be accountable or take responsibility for how they've treated and are currently treating people of color. I hear you. But you know what? Robert said my mic is going in and out. We're going to look at that. Yes. It's a lot. It's a lot. But you know, some people, I mean, there's some black folks who don't want to have this discussion. You know, really. Bottom line, if you believe, what do they sing? The song, "We who believe in freedom cannot rest." And if you believe in justice and fairness, you cannot rest. And that's odorless and colorless. You know, we just have to decide that, you know, just what do they call it, critical race theory. I hear you. Just tell the true history. And guess what? Truth crushed to the earth. Those bodies that were crushed to the earth, they've risen again. Isn't that what we've been told? Truth crushed to the earth. They crushed those bodies under the earth. But oh, praise be to God. Guess what?
Mr. Nichols is on.
Thank you. they have risen. Their spirits have risen. Radar technology, they found, and they're going to find more. But that's what we found out in Tulsa. In fact, they have covered the bodies of so many people. There's a big field that's next to the historic Vernon AME Church. This is John Hope Franklin Reconciliation Park. They found a lot of bodies there. Their bodies are all over the Greenwood section of that are buried deep, deep, deep in the Greenwood section today. And there's a highway that covers, many people believe, a lot of bodies. Tell you what, you got to make things right. John